Hey guys, so today we will be building application in React that allows you to add a comment to a post, and then you can go ahead and upvote that comment by clicking a like button. So if I go ahead and click the like button here, my comment just upvoted to one space, and I can click it again and I'm right on top of this list. So we're taking a look at how we can create that small functionality, but the thing that I actually want to show you guys is how we're going to use the context API in React to construct all our information, our functions, and just distribute that throughout the components of this application. If this is something that you would like to learn, I advise you to go ahead and click the like button, click the subscribe button, and click that bell notification button so that you get notified every time I post a new video like this. With no longer ado, let's get straight into coding. So let's go ahead and create a React app by running npx space create-react-app. Call it whatever you want to call it. I called mine comments. And once that has run, I advise you to go ahead and install the two packages that we're going to use. One is called moment.js to format our dates. And the second one we're going to use is called uuid to generate random IDs for our users. Okay, so go ahead and install this package by running npm node package manager npm install moment. Let that run. Once that is completed, head over and run npm I, which also stands for install uuid. Okay, once those two are installed, let's go ahead and look at the file structure of our React application. And I've run mine just using nmp start, and we have this default loading page that React give us. So I'm gonna go and delete a couple of files over here that I'm not going to use. Guys, so the first file that of the couple of files I'm going to delete is app.css, app test, logo svg, report, test setup, and I can go ahead and delete those files because I'm not going to use it. And what I have done is I went to my GitHub repo. The link is down in the description section, and I've copied all the CSS that I'm going to use for this application. I've pasted inside index.css. I advise you guys to go ahead and do the same. Now let's go ahead and look at index.js. So the files that we've removed is the reporter web vitals. We don't have that file anymore. So let's remove the import. Let's remove all of those comments. We're not going to use it. Save it. Let's go to app.css. App.css, let's remove the CSS. App.js. Let's remove the CSS file and the logo svg file. And I'm gonna go ahead and remove everything inside of this div as I'm not going to use it. And I'm gonna get myself ready to start my application by changing this one to container, app container, that class. That's the class I'm using. And I'm just gonna add an h1 tag over here, which I'm gonna say comment on post. Okay, let's save this and let's see if we have an application running. There we go. So we have comment on post with the styling that I currently have for this application. So the first thing first that we're going to do now, let's go ahead and create the context file, which we will use the context API to generate. We're going to create a context file with some default comments in it, or some default objects in it. And then once we have this default objects in it, we're going to display that in our application. Okay, and how I'm going to go about doing that, I'm going to create a new directory inside the source directory. Right click, new folder. So if you guys are wondering, I am using Visual Studio Code. So I called my directory context, and inside of this directory I'm going to create a file called context. Best practice is to name it what it does. So this context file will provide the comments for me. So I'm going to say provider.js, and I can go ahead and say React function component export, and there we have a React function created for me. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with this file. So the things that I'm going to use are those imported packages that I've installed. So I can go ahead and say import v4 as uuid v4. This you guys would see in the documentation of the uuid from uuid. And I can go ahead and say import moment from moment.js. Okay, so I'm importing those two as I'm going to use it in this application, and let's get started. So I'm just going to do some basics over here. First I'm going to create an export const, which I'm going to call createContext, create context and not new context, called createContext. It's going to have an empty value in it. Okay, and then I'm going to have this function over here, and what this function is going to provide everything that this context is. Okay, so I'm going to use this context, this comment context, just to provide it throughout this application. So I can go ahead and change this div, both of them, and say comment.provider. Okay, and what it's going to provide, it's going to provide some values, and we're going to get to those values in a moment. Okay, so now I have these values, and one thing I want to explain to you is that with the context API, the context that you want to provide to certain components, you need to wrap those components inside of this context. So the context would be like the parent, and every component that needs to receive something from that context needs to be a child of it. Okay, I hope it makes sense. So what we can do is, let's go ahead inside of the section and say all the components that are wrapped with this context API, they are actually props and children of this children of this context API. Okay, so this means that I can pass through any value, any function through to my children. Okay, as the parent, I can pass through anything through to my children. Okay, so now that I have that, and because I'm using props, I'm going to need to pass this through here in my function props. Okay, because that's the props that I'm using over there. And let's go ahead and set up my default users. So first I'm going to go ahead and say, let me go ahead and say const comments. Let me just set up my default comments so that we have something on the screen. Set comments use state. Okay, and then the current state is going to be an array, and that array is going to be objects. Okay, so my first object, I'm going to have an ID, and that ID is going to be generated by my UUID v4 package that I've installed, and I'm going to have a username. Okay, so this one's username is just going to be Jane Wright, and Jane Wright already has a comment that she's added, which I just called the body, and I'm going to call this tutorial will be an hour long. Okay, and I have a timestamp as when this was actually posted. My timestamp is going to be, I can go ahead and call moment, which is the package that I've installed, and I'm going to give through when it was posted. So this one was posted actually last year, so December, the day before Christmas. Okay, and I'm going to tell moment how to read those string that I provided to him, read it as month and day. Okay, then I can go ahead and say from now, which will actually tell me when last this was posted. It'll say a month, 2 months, 3 months ago. Okay, and after my timestamp I have like. Okay, so did anyone like this? On default, no one liked this, and I'm gonna go ahead and just press Ctrl B to close the sidebar so we have more space to work with, and then quickly see if we can zoom in. Just copy this, and I'm gonna add it there. Yeah, so this is going to generate a unique ID for this one as well. So my second one won't be Jane, but let's call it Richard. Richard Goodley. I don't know what type of surname is that. Richard Goodley. And Richard posted that I watched the entire thing. So he actually sat down for an hour and watched the tutorial and learned something awesome. And Richard actually had no time during the festive season to do this, and he did it this year. So let's go ahead and say the first, which was yesterday. So that's when he had an hour to spare to watch this entire tutorial, and nobody liked this as well. And now we have our default comments over here, that we currently want with our sorry, with this application, and I'm going to provide this default comments through to the app. So I can go ahead and say the values that I want to provide is this array of comments. So I'm providing that to the children of this provider. Okay, so as I've said, that we need to go ahead and say all the files that need to make use of this provider needs to be children of this file. So they need to be wrapped within this function, within this default function. So I can go ahead and say my index.js, because I'm not going to have any other providers within this application. You can have more than one provider, but I'm only going to have this one file as my provider. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that comment provider. I'm going to go ahead and say comment context provider, so I can import that. So that it's imported, and I'm wrapping this entire application with this provider. Okay, so now it provides all the information to this entire application. If I save this, nothing should change. See, nothing is broken. Awesome. So let's go ahead inside of my app.js over here, and let's quickly check. If I go ahead and do the following, say const, let's go get those comments that was provided to us using the context API. So I can go ahead and say use context. So if I say use context, let's see, that imported automatically. And then the provider that I want to import is the comments context, actually just comment context, and that's imported as well. So now I have access to those comments. Just to show you guys how I have access to that, I can go ahead here and just do a loop through this. Let's say comments.map, or let me wrap this in an unordered list. Okay, move this up. So comments.map, I'm just gonna say list item, and I can go ahead and say comment.body. Okay, let's see, let's save this. Let's see, saved, it's compiling. Let's refresh. There we go. So I actually have comment.body because I need to wrap this with curly braces as well, as that is JavaScript. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's refresh. There we go. So now we have access to that body. As you guys can see, this tutorial will be an hour long. I've watched the entire tutorial. So we have that inside of this app.js. But what I need to do next is actually go ahead and add that form where we will be the form that's going to allow us to add a new comment. Before I do that, let me just create a component that will display this body actually very nicely the way I wanted it to be displayed. A component I'm going to use here instead of the LIs over here. Okay, so I'm going to go Control B, open this up again, close that for now. In my source directory, create a folder. I'm going to call this components. And inside this one, I'm going to create a component called comment item, single comment item .js. And I'm going to say react function comment export. There we go. So I have my comment item file generated for me. And I am going to go ahead and say inside of this one, let me change this div. It's going to have a class. Its class name, I'm going to just add a class name called item-container. That's my class name. And inside of here, I'm going to have another div. And inside of this div, well, let me just add a class name to it. This is for styling purposes. Post-main. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some spans here. So I'm going to have two span tags. Class name is equal to post-title, and this one is going to be the title, and the second one is going to be the time. So class name is equal to post-time. Okay, so that's my post time. And what I need to do now, I actually need to go ahead and import this comment to this file, okay, to this file, but not this file, but actually this file over here. So what I'm gonna do is the following. I can go ahead and say, sorry, I'm gonna say div tag, and inside of this div, let me just add a class name to it as well, which is this class, and I'm gonna call this post dash secondary. And inside this, I'm going to have a p tag, and I'm going to call this class name, sorry, it's going to call post dash body, and that's my post body. And I'm going to have a button also with this one. So the button is the button that you're going to click to like, it's going to be a button to click to like that post. Okay, so I can save this as I'm not using it in my app.js yet. But what I'm gonna do is, instead of using this list item over here, I can go ahead and import that. So I'm gonna say comment item, which is this one over here. So there it's imported, comment item right there, comment item. And what I want to pass through is this entire object. Okay, so I want to pass through this entire object to it by creating a prop called comment, and I'm going to pass through comment. So I'm passing through comment to this comment prop over here so that I can go ahead and use it in this file. So if I go ahead over here, let me quickly save this and show you. It's going to be blank because I'm not doing anything with it. Let's refresh. So I only have my like button, which are the like buttons created over here. Let me just add my class to this before I forget. So this is called the like dash button btn dash default. Okay, so that's that. So now I've actually passed through some values to this guy. I can go ahead and destructure this over here and say comment. Okay, so now I don't need to go ahead and say props.comment, and I can go ahead and call all the values that I want out of that comment by also destructuring. So I can call the ID, I can call the username, the body, the timestamp, and also the like, how many likes it has, and I can call that, I can pull all of that out from this comment. Okay, from that comment being passed over there. Now I can use that by going ahead in here and using JS, say username, that's my post title, and then my time, I can go ahead and say timestamp that I'm using over there, my body, as you guys have guessed it, is body, and then my like, I can just write before likes, I can post added like there. So if I save this and refresh over here, let's see, there we go. So now you can see who commented, when did I comment. So it says in a year, this tutorial, then Richard commented 2 days ago. So this is now working as the way I wanted. I just need to go ahead and hook up the ID to this like button, but before I do that, I need to go actually create a function that is going to use that like button. Okay, so let's go ahead back to my, or let's create the next one. Let's create actually the form file, which is going to be the file where you can type in, and then once typed in, you can click the post. It's going to add that comment to this comments. Make sense? Let's go ahead and create it. So I'm going to go ahead in my components directory, create a new one. I'm just going to call it form.js, a react function. There we go. So there's my form, and what I'm going to do with this form is, let's go ahead and create a const, let's say data, set data or comment or whatever you want to name it. It's what's going to be typed, say useState, and it's going to be an empty string. Okay, so on default that's going to be an empty string, and then what we're going to do is the following. I'm going to need a function that's going to handle the comment from my provider, so a function that comes through from my, that handles the comment. But before I go ahead and do that, let's just create a look and feel of this form. So it's going to do nothing for now, but it's just going to look great. Make sense? Class name, let's say form dash container, and inside it I'm going to create a form, and then my form is going to have an onSubmit function. Okay, I'm going to create this onSubmit function right now. Just add a class name to it. I call this class form, and create our text area, which is where the user is actually going to type in his comment to this post. I'm going to add and say text area, and I'm going to go ahead and add my class to this text area. So my class name is going to be post-input. Okay, and I'm also going to add another function to this. It's going to be an onChange function. Okay, I'm going to go create that onChange function shortly, and I'm going to go ahead and add a placeholder to this just to make it look nice. So I'm going to say type comment here dot dot dot, and the default value of this is actually going to be that empty string data that I've set over there. Okay, and what I also need to do, I need to add a button to this. So I'm going to go ahead and say button, and my button is going to say add comment, and my button is going to need a class. So I'm going to say class name is equal to let's call this, it's actually called post dash button and btn dash default. Okay, so now that I have those two, I need to go create these functions quickly, or else I'm gonna get an error because they can't be empty. So let me go ahead and say const handle submit is gonna take in my event, the arrow function. So I can go ahead and say event dot prevent default so that the page doesn't refresh when it's submitted. And then I'm going to need to import a function here, which is going to come from my context provider that I'm going to use. Right after I've done that, I'm going to reset the data to an empty string. So I can go ahead and say set data back to an empty string. Okay, now let's go ahead and create the second one. It's going to be called const handle change, and this one is going to take the current the current element that it's. So I go ahead and say set data, which is this over here. So I'm setting this empty string actually to this current element dot target dot its value. Okay, so that's what's happening over here. So as I type in, it's going to keep on setting this data to whatever is being typed in, and once I click add comment, it's going to go ahead and send it through to this context provider page, and then that provider will add it to this comment right here below. But if I go ahead and save this now, and let's see, okay, I didn't add it in. So on submit it's going to be handle submit, and on change is going to be handle change, because now it's giving me an error. So let's save that, let's refresh this. There we go. I'm going back to app.js just to import that form. So I can go ahead and say form, save, refresh. There we go. So now I have my form, which I'm going to add my comment with my add comment button. At the moment it won't add anything here because there's no functionality coming from this file to actually update this and re-render it. So we need to go ahead and look at that next. So basically I'm going to go back to my provider, my context provider file, and I'm going to update this file. Okay, create a new state. So I'm going to say const user dash set user, it's equal to useState, and it's going to be an empty string, and I'm going to create a function const username. Okay, I'm going to show you guys in a minute why I'm using this, why I'm creating this function. So my function username, it's going to take in an index or an ID, and let me do the following. It's going to take in an index or an ID, and it's going to create a fetch. So I'm going to do a fetch API. So I'm going to say fetch, and I'm fetching some data from https // it's called JSON placeholder typicode or typicode.com, okay, /users that index. So I can go say dollar curly braces index and close the curly braces. And for this to work, I'm going to need to use backticks. Okay, so now it reads it as a variable. So I'm going to copy this quickly and show you guys what this does. I'm going to copy this, open up a new tab, say enter, and as you guys can see, it returns a JSON object for me, an array with objects with random users. And the reason why I'm passing to an index is that I want to get a specific user. So if I say 3, and it's going to just render me one user with a username, and this is what I want to generate random users. Okay, so once that is done, I'm going to say that then response, let's say response.json. okay, I'm going to say that then I can go ahead and say the data that the JSON is converted, I can go ahead and say set user and set that user to data dot what I'm going to call it, not username, but I'm actually going to call it name, because if you guys can see over here in this object, name has name and surname. That's what I want, while username just has a single name, because I want name and surname. Okay, now that that is done, I need to go ahead and have this run on load. Okay, so I need to have this function run on load, and the way I'm going to do that is going to use the hook called useEffect. So the React hook called useEffect, I'm going to use that hook to say on run, do the following for me. So when you run, set the user, set the current user that I've just declared right here on top by calling this function. So call the function called username and pass through a random number to it. Okay, and that random number is what we're going to pass through here and return that user's data. Okay, so the random number, I can go and say pass an integer and use math.random. okay, so math.random times 10. The reason why I'm using 10 because I think that it only returns like 10 objects, 10 or array with 10 values in it, so I don't want to go more than 10 over here. And that's it. So when this loads, what it's going to do is on load, it's going to run this. It's going to run this function, this username function, get a user, set it to this user right over there, and then I can go ahead and use that user inside of my application. Okay, so the only thing I need to do now over here is just set a second param, which is dependency, which is going to be empty. So in an array, you can actually add a list of dependencies to say, should this change, run this function again, run this effect again, or should this change or update, run this use effect again. But for my purposes of this tutorial, I only want this to run on did component mount. Okay, so that's basically it. Now that I have that there, need a couple of functions. I'm going to need the add comment function I'm going to use in my form right there. So that's the following function that I'm going to create. I'm going to call this const add comment, which is equal to, it's going to take in one param, so I'm going to call comment. That is the param that it's going to take into this function. And I'm going to do the same thing as useEffect, so that when someone adds a comment, I want this function to run to get a random user. So I'm just going to copy that, and then below it I'm going to set it to say set comments as a new array. Okay, so we're going to spread the current array. So we're going to say spread the current comments, and then we're going to add an object to it. Okay, so what we're adding is a new object. That object is going to have an ID, and that ID is going to be used by our library UUID for random ID, username, and our username is actually going to be user, which is this guy. Okay, so it's going to be user, and then after this we have body. Okay, so body is whatever was typed in, and that is going to be the comment that is passed through over here as a param, whatever was typed in. And we're going to have a timestamp. So my timestamp, I'm going to go ahead and say moment, not comment, moment. Okay, so I'm not going to pass through anything to moment, because it's take this time right now. I'm going to say from now. So this should show us a couple of seconds ago, something like that, because it's going to take this current time right now that this was created, and it's going to say from now. It's going to show us a string that says a couple of moments ago, a couple of seconds ago. And last but not least, as no one has liked this, because this comment is just added. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to provide this function to my component. Okay, so now I can go ahead and say add component. I can go and provide it. If I save this, I can go to forms. Let me go back to my application over here. I can go back to forms and say forms const, let's say the structure, add comment right here, and then say use context. So we use context, and this comes from comment context, so that's being imported as there as well. So this guy is the one that provides everything throughout the components throughout of this application. So now that I have this, if you guys remember earlier, I said I'm going to need a function over here, which is going to be that add comment function right here, and the only thing that it takes through will be data. Okay, so this guy, the handle change, it sets data to be whatever's being typed, and then on submit, I'm just passing through data over here as a param to this function, and that will go straight to this guy, and it's going to add it as a body. So let me quickly show you what it does. Let's save, and then let's save, unsave. Just going to refresh this. I'm going to say new comment added. Let's say add comment. There we go, new comment added. Nice. So the last thing that we need to do now is I need to go ahead and hook up this like button. Okay, so in order for me to hook up the like button, I need a like function as well. So that function is going to be created inside my context file, and that function is going to be responsible for the likes. So I'm going to go ahead and say const update likes, and this is going to take in one param, which is going to be the ID. So I'm going to say new comment. Okay, and sorry about that, I just got a little brain freeze there. So let's go ahead and do the following. So I'm going to say const index, because I want to find an index inside of this current array. So there's comments dot find index. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass through the following, the comment, which is that's actually this current value or object inside of that array, and I'm gonna test it against the one provided as a param. So I can go ahead and say comment dot id equal to new comment dot id. So secondly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const copy comments. Okay, and all this is going to be is just a copy of the current array of comments, and once that copied, I'm going to say copy comments and the current index of it dot like is equal to, it's actually plus equal to 1. Okay, so I'm updating that like over there, and once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and say copy comments and sort. Okay, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to say sort A and B. That's going to be A and B, because I'm going to need to use a function because I'm using integers and not string. So if it was just string, I could just use sort, but because it's integers, I need to use a function that actually verifies the two against each other. So I'm going to say whatever object is A, or let's say object is B dot like, okay, minus whatever object A is dot like. So I want you to sort them by their likes, okay, because that's why I'm doing the sort them by how many likes they have. Once the sort is done, I'm going to go ahead and say set comment and I'm going to set it to copy comments. All right, I hope that makes a lot of sense. Next thing I need to do in this file now, I just need to export this. So I'm going to export this by going to the value and provide it throughout the application right here in my comment context provider. So now I can go and say save it. I can go to comment item, and comment item is going to need a function over here once this button is clicked. So I can say on click function, run a function which I just exported called update likes, and the only thing we need to pass through to this is that ID over there. Okay, but in order for this to work, I'm going to need to import it into this file. And the way to import that, I can go ahead and say const, and I can say update likes, and that comes from useContext API, and the one I'm using is called createContext. There we go. So if I save this and we refresh this, let's see, and let's just refresh it again. Maximum update depth exceeded. This can happen when a component repeatedly calls set state. Let's see, so it could be this guy over here. Let's quickly check what happens if we do the following. Let me say save. Okay, there we go. I think that sorted out my issue. So I'm just go ahead and say new comment added. Let's say add comment. That's my new comment added. I can upvote the Richard. Like, now Richard is right on top. Liana is the one just added. If I click like, Liana automatically second. If I like it again, Liana's automatically first. So guys, I hope that you've learned a lot from this tutorial, and I really like to hear from you guys. Hit me up in the comments below, and yeah, please do like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button so you get notified the next time I release a new video. Until next time guys, stay safe.